Good evening, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Jakub Neruda. I'm a basic enterprise engineering bitch at Safetica, where we do cybersecurity software. But, oh shit. Well, that's off to a great start. But anyways, I do fun stuff in my spare time. And today I want to talk a little bit about modules, because I use my hobby projects to basically test out new C++ features and to try out various things regarding clean code and clean architecture. So over past year and a half, I made a thing. I made a video game, as you can see. This is purely written in C++. I handwritten a 3D engine using 2D graphics library. It has a built-in network stack. It has a built-in level editor. We play it at work sometimes. And in terms of numbers that will be more relevant to us, this is about 350 source files, about 24K lines of code. So it's not a huge project, but it's not tiny either. And it has been built using whatever subset of C++23 was supported by Microsoft Visual Studio at the moment of writing. The build system is instrumented with CMake. And a thing that will be relevant at the end of this talk is that I do have a GitHub Actions CI/CD pipeline set up. So I know how long my builds take. And as I said, I tend to use my hobby projects to test out new C++ features. So in March of 2024, I was like, hey, Microsoft claims that they support C++ modules in Visual Studio. So let's try them out, right? And gradually, I rewritten about 30% of my code base into modules. I rewritten headers into module interface files. I added new source files, modules first. So about 30% was migrated. And I want to tell you about this experience and why you shouldn't follow my suit. So first claim is that modules are backwards compatible. Of course, everything in C++ tends to be backwards compatible. And indeed, as I migrated only 30% of my code base, you can intermix headers with modules. You can import legacy headers in modules. You can import modules and headers. That works. Also, a cool thing, I didn't need anything from CMake because I'm not sure about modules support in CMake. When you add an .ixx file, which is a module interface file, into MSVC, it already knows what to do about it. It can compile it properly. It took them 3 years to figure this out, but eventually they did. But there's about where the easy stuff ends. Like in the middle of past year, Microsoft was really bragging about this import std feature. They claimed that if you use import std, you will get the whole std library in shorter amount of time than it takes to include a vector header. And that's because modules are compiled into some binary representation that is supposed to be faster for a compiler to load and understand and whole 9 yards. However, in the middle of past year, when you try to do import std on a legacy code base, which also includes those legacy headers elsewhere, it made 2 versions of the same symbol, and it effectively failed at link time. Now, I tried this last week with a newest Visual Studio. It no longer happens. That's great. At the time, if you were determined to write a brand new project using modules only, you would effectively have to roll your own dependencies because you would be unable to use anything that's on the net. That was a bad thing. However, there's another feature. You can import a legacy header, and it will turn into sort of module, but not really. It should be also faster to import afterwards. I tried it also last week. It didn't work for me out of the box, and I didn't really care enough to figure out what's wrong. It just didn't work out of the box. That's the message for me here. Another thing is fun with interpreting the standard, and most importantly, in relation to the private module fragment. Now, modules are comprised of fragments, which are basically different sections, and you can do different stuff in each section. You have section in which you can import legacy headers. You have the section in which you export symbols, and then you have this module private section from which you shouldn't be able to export anything. And according to some sources that show up at the top of Google search, if you do changes to code that it's in private module fragment, it won't trigger recompilation of dependent modules. That sounds great, you know, because I don't know how do you feel about this, but the biggest pain point in C++ development for me is not that I have to deal with dependencies or build systems. It's the fact that I have to juggle header and sources, and it just takes twice the amount of time to move everything, to refactor everything. It's just a pain to me. So even if I had to have separated declarations from definitions, that would be a step forward for me. As I've been told by some people, that is not mandated by standard that the recompilation won't trigger. And indeed, in Microsoft Visual Studio, recompilation will happen every time you touch the module interface file. So sadly, my biggest pain point with C++ was not mended yet. You probably have seen this slide coming. Stability was not great either. I meant not thousands, a lot of internal compiler crashes on various pieces of code, usually on some templated code that was coming from a legacy header. And in the latest Microsoft Visual Studio, I got a newsletter, and they said, hey, we finally fixed that bug where you couldn't export a function that was using deducing this, which is quite sad because in modern C++, it's basically cornerstone of any interface that is trying to be correct, right? So if you try to use this in Microsoft Visual Studio, do expect hard compiler crashes. Also, IntelliSense is still in experimental support, which means a lot of things. Namely, they compile your interface files into another binary representation, so presumably they can fetch the IntelliSense faster. However, I do have a habit of hitting Ctrl-C, Ctrl-S every so often, and they log the file for writing while they are compiling it. So I was constantly being met with save as dialogues because I was unable to save that interface file while it was compiling. This doesn't happen for regular headers, right? They also forgot to include function parameter names in IntelliSense, and that problem is still here. I don't know, perhaps Microsoft is trying to teach me to use strongly typed interfaces. Maybe. But if I'm using some math function from standard library, that really sucks if I don't know if X or Y coordinate is coming first or second. And also, IntelliSense was crashing a lot on templated code. Basically to a point where it stopped working altogether. I just had gigabytes of crash dumps in my crash dump folder, and I was sending them to Microsoft. And they were like, hey, it works on our machines. And hey, I have 3 different machines here. It works on neither. So yeah, I got pissed off. And I removed all 100 files containing modules. It was a fun afternoon. And you know, I said I do have a GitHub CI/CD pipeline set up, so I know how long my builds take. And within the C++ community, there's a lot of wishful thinking that modules will automatically solve all your problems with long compilation times. Presumably, at least because they are faster to import, right? Well, after I removed all of the modules from my code, I checked the pipeline, and it was about 18% faster. And you know that game doesn't compile for that long. It's about 7 minutes, so who gives? But like on a legacy project, if you're like hoped that you can accelerate your builds with modules, you could shoot yourself to the foot. So if you ask me, are modules there yet? My answer would be no, at least for Microsoft ecosystem anyways.
Jakub, may I ask about the difference when you use incremental builds, like in the development? What was better and by how much?
Well, I don't remember numbers or feelings about that. So I think it was about the same.
Okay.
Anyways, with modules, like for me, they bring one great feature, especially for newcomer programmers. They make it easier to declare your modules, to import their across the code, because you no longer have to track where in the file system that particular interface file lies. That's great about modules. That's also about where their benefits end for me, because as I said, they don't really solve the problem with interface and implementation file. Also, you can't export macros from modules, which is not great until we get code reflection paired with code generation. Like anybody who's using Enlogman JSON probably knows that we use macros for code generations and that it's great in some cases. And as I said, stability problems, also problems with packaging when you want to give a library to somebody, general supporting tools, whole 9 yards. I wouldn't definitely recommend using modules in legacy projects. Like if you want to build a small brand new project with modules, that will probably be a better experience. And like when I ranted about this on social media, there was like this one guy who approached me in the middle of past year, and he was like, hey, we're using modules in our company. We have brand new project, built from ground up, modules first. It works great for us, but we write all of our dependencies in-house because they couldn't use import std, right? I don't know what to take from this. I wouldn't choose that route. So anyways, it was a long lightning talk, definitely not lightning, just talk. And it was everything I want to tell you. If you're interested in the game, I briefly showed at the beginning of the presentation. It's available for free on itch.io, only for Windows. And I do write stuff about C++, clean code, clean architecture, all these stuff. You can read it all on my blog. There's also a devlog series on how I made a 3D engine using 2D graphics library. It's fun. So thanks for your attention.